He invited his childless ex-wife to his baby shower to mock her, but she came with Triplets and Bentley. The champagne flute shattered against the marble floor of the Dreamland estate, sending crystal shards skittering across the Italian tiles like frozen tears. 300 of the Hamptons elite turned in unison, their conversations dying mid-sentence as they witnessed what would become the most talked-about moment in high society history. Selah Moreau stood in the doorway of the grand ballroom, her presence commanding absolute silence. She wore a custom Valentino dress the color of midnight, her natural hair styled in an elaborate crown that caught the light from the massive chandelier above. But it wasn't her stunning appearance that had caused Cressida Langford's champagne to slip from her trembling fingers. It was the sight of the 3 children flanking Selah like young royalty. Triplets. Beautiful, radiant, and unmistakably hers. "Oh my God," someone whispered from the crowd. "Are those?" Corbett Dreamland felt his world tilt on its axis. The man who had built an empire through calculated moves and ruthless precision found himself speechless, his face draining of color as his eyes locked onto the woman he had discarded like a broken toy 3 years ago. The woman he had invited here to humiliate. The woman who was supposed to be childless, broken, defeated. The woman who was now walking toward him with 3 children and a confidence that could cut glass. "Corbett," Selah's voice carried across the silent ballroom, honey smooth but with an edge sharp enough to draw blood. "Thank you for the invitation. I thought it was time you met my family." Cressida, 7 months pregnant and suddenly feeling enormous in her designer maternity gown, clutched at Corbett's arm. Who is she?" she stammered, though the horrified recognition in her eyes suggested she already knew. "Hello, beautiful souls. Welcome back to another incredible story that will absolutely blow your mind. I can already feel the energy from wherever you're watching, whether you're cozy at home, commuting, or taking a break from your day. How are you doing today? Please, drop in the comments section where you're watching from. And hey, if you haven't hit that subscribe button yet, do me a huge favor and smash it right now because trust me, you're going to want to see how this story unfolds. And tomorrow, I have also created something very special just for you, another beautiful story to share with you, and I don't want you to miss it for anything. Once again, welcome to Mr. Paul's Stories, where we come together like old friends, wrapped in the warmth of stories that light up our souls. Now, let's continue today's story. "Mama," whispered Isolde, her voice like silver bells as she gazed up at the opulent ballroom, "is this where you used to live?" The question hit Corbett like a physical blow. This child, this beautiful, perfect child, was calling Selah Mama. The woman he had left because she couldn't give him children had somehow found a way to build the family he had always claimed to want. Selah's smile was radiant as she knelt to her daughter's level, her voice carrying across the hushed crowd. "Yes, sweetheart. But this was never really home. Home is where love lives, with you, Cashin and Leander." The boys stepped closer to their mother, protective instincts kicking in as they sensed the tension in the room. Cashin, at 8 years old, had Selah's intelligent eyes and a posture that suggested he feared nothing. Leander bounced slightly on his toes, his sunny disposition undimmed by the strange atmosphere. And Isolde, God, Isolde looked like a princess from a fairy tale, her dark curls catching the light as she surveyed the room with the curiosity of someone who had never known a moment of doubt about her place in the world. "These are my children," Selah announced, her voice clear and proud as she rose to her full height. "Cashin, Leander, and Isolde. The family I was always meant to have." The guests began to murmur, a low buzz of shock and speculation that grew louder with each passing second. Corbett's business associates exchanged glances. His mother, Vivian Dreamland, sat frozen in her chair, her face a mask of horrified fascination. And Cressida, poor trembling Cressida, looked like she might faint. "You." Corbett's voice cracked as he struggled to find words. "You were supposed to be broken." Selah finished for him, taking a step closer. The crowd parted before her like she was Moses crossing the Red Sea. Destroyed? Unable to move on from the man who told me I was worthless because I couldn't give him what he wanted. Another step closer. Corbett could smell her perfume now, the same scent she had worn during their marriage, but somehow it seemed richer, more intoxicating than he remembered. "I need to tell you something, Corbett," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the room. "Something I should have told you 3 years ago when you handed me those divorce papers and said I had failed you as a wife." The silence was deafening. Even the children seemed to sense that their mother was about to deliver words that would change everything. Selah reached into her purse and pulled out a manila envelope, yellowed with age. With deliberate slowness, she opened it and withdrew a medical report, the letterhead clearly visible, Manhattan Fertility Clinic. "The infertility," she said, her voice steady as stone, "was never mine." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Corbett's face went from pale to gray as the implications hit him. Around the room, gasps and whispers erupted as 300 guests realized they were witnessing the destruction of a man's entire identity. "What are you talking about?" Cressida whispered, her hand instinctively moving to her swollen belly. Selah's smile was sharp as a blade as she looked at her replacement. "I'm talking about the medical records your fiancé made me hide. The ones that prove he's the reason we couldn't conceive. The ones that show he's been lying to you just like he lied to me." The envelope slipped from Corbett's numb fingers as 3 years of suppressed truth crashed over him like a tsunami. He had blamed Selah, destroyed her, cast her aside like she was defective. And now, in front of everyone who mattered in his world, she was revealing that he had been the problem all along. "These children," Selah continued, her voice rising with quiet triumph, "represent everything you told me I could never have. Love, family, joy. And I found it all after I stopped trying to be enough for a man who was never enough for me. What would you do if you discovered that someone had let you suffer for their own shame? How far would you go to reclaim your truth?" The medical report fluttered to the floor like a dying bird, but its impact reverberated through the ballroom like an earthquake. Corbett Dreamond, CEO of Dreamond Industries, master of the universe, the man who had never met a deal he couldn't close or a problem he couldn't solve with money, stood paralyzed as his carefully constructed world crumbled around him. "That's impossible," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the rising murmur of 300 shocked guests. "The doctors said, you were the one who—" "Who what, Corbett?" Selah's voice cut through his stammering like a scalpel through skin. "Who was broken? Who was defective? Who was less than a woman because she couldn't give you the air you demanded?" She stepped closer, and for the first time in 3 years, Corbett found himself truly seeing his ex-wife. This wasn't the woman he remembered, the one who had grown smaller with each failed pregnancy test, who had apologized for her body's betrayal, who had accepted his blame like it was her due. This Selah radiated power from every pore, her dark skin glowing with health, her eyes blazing with the fire of someone who had walked through hell and emerged reforged. "You want to know what really happened during those 5 years of marriage?" Selah's voice grew stronger, feeding off the energy of the captive audience. "While I was pumping my body full of hormones, undergoing painful procedures, spending every day believing I was failing you, you knew. You had known for months that you were the reason we couldn't conceive." The triplets moved instinctively closer to their mother, forming a protective semicircle around her. Cashin, the eldest by mere minutes, had inherited Selah's fierce intelligence and was already reading the room like a chess master. His dark eyes, so like his mother's, swept across the crowd with the kind of assessment that would serve him well in whatever field he chose to conquer. "Mama's talking about important grown-up things," he whispered to his siblings, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had learned early to be his mother's protector. "She's being very brave right now." Leander, sunny and optimistic even in the face of adult tension he didn't understand, reached up to slip his small hand into Selah's. "You're the bravest mama in the whole world," he announced loudly enough for half the ballroom to hear, causing several guests to press hands to their hearts. And Isolde, precious Isolde with her grandmother's eyes and her mother's unshakable confidence, tilted her head to study Corbett with a kind of innocent directness that could topple empires. "Are you the mean man who made Mama cry before we found her?" she asked, her clear voice carrying across the silent room like a bell tolling judgment. The question hit Corbett like a physical blow. These children, these perfect, beautiful children, knew about him. Knew about the pain he had caused their mother. And they had chosen her anyway, loved her anyway, made her their world in a way he had never bothered to try. He started, then stopped, his tongue thick with shame and shock. Cressida, who had been clinging to his arm like a lifeline, suddenly stepped back as if she'd been burned. "The baby," she whispered, her hand moving protectively to her swollen belly. "If you can't, if the problem is yours, then whose?" The question hung in the air like poison gas. Every guest, every server, every musician in the corner froze as they realized what she was asking. If Corbett was infertile, then who was the father of the child Cressida was carrying? Selah's smile was razor-sharp as she watched the seeds of doubt take root in her replacement's mind. "That's a question you should probably ask him in private, don't you think?" "Cressida, don't listen to her," Corbett said desperately, reaching for his fiancée's hand. "She's trying to destroy what we have. The baby is mine, it has to be mine." But Cressida was already backing away, her face pale as parchment. "You told me that you and she never, that it was her fault you couldn't have children. You said she was frigid, that she couldn't satisfy you as a woman." The lie hung between them like a rotting corpse. Selah felt the familiar sting of old wounds, all the ways Corbett had poisoned their story to make himself the victim and her the villain. But this time, instead of the crushing pain she had once felt, she experienced only a cold, satisfied rage. "He told you I was frigid?" Selah's laugh was like breaking glass. "Is that what he said? That I couldn't satisfy him?" She turned to address the crowd, her voice carrying to every corner of the ballroom. "Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you about the man you've all come here to celebrate." "Selah, don't," Corbett started, panic making his voice crack. "Don't what? Don't tell the truth? The way you didn't tell the truth for 5 years while I underwent procedure after procedure, thinking I was the problem." Selah's composure never wavered, but her words landed like hammer blows. "The way you didn't tell the truth when you left me, telling everyone who would listen that I was barren, that I had failed you as a wife?" Vivian Dreamond, Corbett's mother, finally found her voice from where she sat frozen in her chair. "Corbett, is this true? Did you know?" Her aristocratic features were etched with horror as she looked at her son, the golden boy who had never disappointed her, never shown weakness, never revealed the depth of his capacity for cruelty. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. And in that silence, Corbett's world, built on lies, maintained through manipulation, decorated with other people's pain, finally collapsed under the weight of the truth. He began, then stopped, his shoulders sagging as 3 years of buried guilt finally surfaced. "I was going to tell you," he whispered to Selah, the words pathetic even to his own ears. "But you were so fragile, and I thought if we just kept trying." "You thought what?" Selah's voice was deadly quiet. "That you could let me believe I was broken rather than admit you weren't the perfect specimen you pretended to be? That you could watch me blame myself, hate myself, destroy myself trying to fix something that was never wrong with me?" The children pressed closer to their mother, sensing her pain even across the years that separated her from it. Cashin's small jaw was set with determination, Leander's sunny disposition had clouded with protective fury, and Isolde's innocent eyes had sharpened with a kind of loyalty that would follow Selah to the ends of the earth. These were her children now. Her family. Her proof that love could triumph over lies, that healing could bloom from the deepest wounds, that sometimes the best revenge was simply living well. "The fertility treatments nearly killed me," Selah continued, her voice steady but her eyes blazing. "The hormones, the procedures, the monthly heartbreak. And through it all, you watched me suffer, knowing you could end it with one honest conversation." She looked around the ballroom, taking in the sea of shocked faces, people who had whispered about her failure, who had pitted Corbett for being stuck with a barren wife, who had celebrated when he found someone who could give him what Selah supposedly could not. "But I want to thank you," she said, turning back to Corbett with a smile that could have melted steel. "Because your cruelty led me to discover something beautiful. These children didn't need to be born from my body to be mine. They chose me, just like I chose them. And we created a family based on love, not genetics or ego or the need to prove something to people who don't matter." The truth of it rang through the ballroom like a church bell. Here was a woman who had been broken down, cast aside, blamed for sins that were never hers, and she had risen from the ashes of her marriage more powerful than ever before. What kind of love do you think is stronger? The kind that comes from blood, or the kind that comes from choice? The ballroom had become a powder keg, and Selah held the match. But it was Gareth Holloway who struck it. Corbett's business partner and closest friend had been watching the destruction unfold from across the room, his face growing paler with each revelation. As Cressida backed away from Corbett, her hand pressed protectively to her belly, her eyes wild with the dawning realization that the man she was about to marry might not be the father of her child, Gareth made a decision that would shatter what remained of the dream and empire. "Cressida," his voice cut through the tense silence like a blade through silk. "Don't let him lie to you anymore." Every head in the ballroom turned toward him. Gareth Holloway, Harvard-educated, old money, Corbett's right-hand man for 15 years, was walking toward them with the measured pace of a man about to commit professional suicide. "Gareth, what are you doing?" Corbett's voice cracked with panic. "This isn't the time or place." "When is the time, Corbett?" Gareth's usually controlled demeanor was cracking, revealing years of suppressed guilt. "When you marry her. When the baby is born. When you let another woman believe she's defective because you can't face the truth about yourself." Selah's breath caught in her throat. She had come here for revenge, to expose Corbett's lies about their marriage, but she hadn't expected this. Whatever Gareth was about to reveal would be the nuclear option. "Stop," Corbett commanded, his CEO voice trying to assert dominance. "You're drunk. You don't know what you're saying." "I'm stone-cold sober," Gareth replied, his eyes finding Cressida's across the room. "And I know exactly what I'm saying. The baby you're carrying, it's mine." The words hit the ballroom like a meteor strike. Gasps echoed off the marble walls. Several women clutched their pearls. Two elderly society matrons looked like they might faint. And Cressida, poor betrayed Cressida, let out a sound that was part sob, part scream. "That's impossible," she whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. "Gareth, that was just one night. You said it didn't mean anything." "It meant everything to me," Gareth said softly, his voice carrying across the silent room. "But you were so desperate to make Corbett jealous, to get him to propose, that you convinced yourself it was meaningless." Selah watched in fascination as the house of cards Corbett had built came crashing down. Not only was he infertile, not only had he let her suffer for his shame, but his precious fiancée had been unfaithful with his best friend. The perfect life he had traded her for was built on lies within lies. "You slept with my best friend?" Corbett's voice was strangled, barely human. "While you were still married to her," Cressida shot back, pointing at Selah with a trembling finger. "While you were telling me how cold she was, how she couldn't give you what you needed, you were still going home to her bed." The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Selah felt a familiar pang, the old wound of discovering that her marriage had been ending long before she knew it, that Corbett had been sharing their intimate moments with another woman, using her supposed frigidity as foreplay for his affair. But then Isolde's small hand slipped into hers, warm and trusting, and the pain transformed into something else entirely: pity. Pity for the man who had had everything, a woman who loved him, a partnership built on mutual respect, the possibility of healing together, and had thrown it all away for the illusion of perfection. "Mama," Cashin whispered, tugging at her dress. "Why is everyone yelling?" "Because sometimes," Selah said quietly, her voice meant for her children but carrying to the edges of the crowd, "people make choices that hurt everyone around them. And sometimes the truth comes out all at once, like a dam breaking." Leander, ever the optimist, looked up at her with concerned eyes. Are you sad, Mama? Do you want to go home? The question cut through the chaos like a beacon. Home. Yes, she had a home now. A real one. Not this marble mausoleum filled with lies and cruelty, but a brownstone in Harlem where love lived in every corner, where laughter echoed off the walls, where she was valued not for what her body could produce, but for who she was as a person. No, baby, she said, kneeling down to meet his eyes while keeping her gaze locked on Corbett. Mama's not sad. Mama's exactly where she needs to be. When she stood, her smile was radiant with the kind of joy that comes from watching karma work its magic. Congratulations, Corbett, she said, her voice honey-sweet and razor-sharp. It seems like you're getting exactly what you deserve. Corbett looked like a man drowning in plain sight. His fiancée was pregnant with another man's child. His business partner had betrayed him in the most personal way possible. His infertility was now public knowledge among everyone who mattered in his social circle. And his ex-wife, the woman he had discarded like garbage, was standing before him with a family he had always claimed to want, looking like a queen among peasants. "This is all your fault," he snarled suddenly, his composure finally cracking completely. "If you had just been woman enough to give me children. If I had been woman enough." Selah's laugh was like breaking crystal. "I was woman enough, Corbett. I was woman enough to love you through 5 years of heartbreak. Woman enough to believe your lies about us. Woman enough to blame myself for your shame. And I was woman enough to walk away when you showed me exactly who you really were." She gestured to her children, who stood around her like a royal guard. "And I was woman enough to find these 3 beautiful souls and give them the kind of love you never understood. The kind that doesn't come with conditions or demands or requirements. The kind that just is." Vivian Dreamond finally found her voice from where she sat frozen in horror. "Corbett James Dreamond, is everything this woman has said true?" The use of his full name, the tone she had used when he was a child caught in mischief, finally broke him. Corbett's shoulders sagged as 3 years of carefully maintained lies finally proved too heavy to carry. "Yes," he whispered, the word barely audible. "Yes, it's all true." The admission hit the room like a physical force. Murmurs erupted from every corner as 300 guests processed the magnitude of what they had witnessed. The golden boy of the Hamptons, the man they had all envied, admired, sought to emulate, was revealed as a fraud, a liar, a man so consumed with his own image that he had destroyed everyone around him to maintain it. "I think," Selah said, her voice cutting through the chaos with surgical precision, "that this baby shower is over." She turned to leave, her children falling into step beside her like a perfectly choreographed dance. But before she reached the doorway, she paused and looked back over her shoulder. "Oh, and Corbett?" Her smile could have powered a small city. "Thank you. If you hadn't thrown me away like trash, I never would have discovered that I was actually a treasure. These children and I, we're going to have a beautiful life together. The kind of life you'll never understand." As they walked toward the exit, Isolde's clear voice rang out one final time, "Bye-bye, mean man. Mama says we don't have to see you anymore." And with that, Selah Moreau walked out of the Dreamond estate for the second time in her life. But this time, she wasn't leaving broken and alone. This time, she was taking her victory with her. The Bentley glided through the Hamptons like a ship cutting through dark water, its interior a sanctuary of leather and silence. But inside the luxury vehicle, 3 small hearts were racing with the kind of excitement that comes from witnessing their mother's moment of absolute triumph. "Mama, you were like a superhero back there," Cashin said, his eyes bright with admiration as he buckled his seatbelt. At 8, he understood more than his siblings about what had just transpired, the layers of betrayal, the public humiliation, the way his mother had walked into a trap and turned it into a stage for her own vindication. Selah caught his eyes in the rearview mirror and smiled, though her hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel. The adrenaline was beginning to fade, leaving behind a complex cocktail of emotions she wasn't sure how to process. Justice, yes. Victory, absolutely. But underneath it all, a sadness for the love that had been real once, before Corbett's pride had poisoned everything they'd built together. Sometimes, she said carefully, when people hurt us, we get the chance to show them who we really are. Not for revenge, but for truth. Leander, bouncing in his car seat with characteristic energy, piped up, "Are we going to see the mean man again?" "No, sweetheart," Selah said firmly. "We're going home. To our real home." But even as she spoke the words, her phone was buzzing with the digital storm that had already begun. In the age of social media, news traveled faster than light, and the destruction of Corbett Drummond was apparently the most entertaining thing to happen in the Hamptons since the last political scandal. Isolde, wise beyond her 6 years, leaned forward in her seat. "Mama, why did that lady have tears? The pretty one with the big tummy." The question hit Selah like a physical blow. Cressida. In all the chaos and triumph of exposing Corbett's lies, she had almost forgotten about the collateral damage. The woman who had stolen her husband was also a victim of his deception, pregnant, alone, and publicly humiliated in front of 300 people. Because, Selah said slowly, she just learned that someone she loved had been lying to her. And that hurts, even when the person isn't very nice to begin with. Her phone buzzed again. And again. By the time they reached the city, it had become a symphony of notifications, missed calls, text messages, social media mentions, and news alerts. The story of the baby shower confrontation was spreading like wildfire across every gossip network, financial blog, and society page on the internet. Drummond empire in ruins. CEO's infertility scandal rocks Hampton's elite. Ex-wife's revenge. How Selah Moreau destroyed her former husband with one medical report. Baby daddy drama. Business partner reveals affair with CEO's fiancé. As they pulled into the driveway of their Harlem brownstone, a far cry from the marble mansion she had once called home, but infinitely more warm and welcoming, Selah's phone rang with a call she had been expecting. "Naomi," she answered, putting the car in park. "Girl, what did you do?" Naomi Elysian's voice crackled through the speaker, equal parts shocked and impressed. "My phone has been ringing non-stop for the last hour. Everyone wants to know if I was in on this masterpiece of public destruction." Selah laughed, the sound lighter than she'd felt in years. "I went to a baby shower." "You went to a baby shower and came home having single-handedly destroyed the most powerful man in New York. Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I told the truth," Selah said simply, watching her children pile out of the car and race toward their front door, eager to return to the safety of their world. "That's all I did." "Honey, the truth just cost Corbett Drummond about $50 million in stock value. His board is already calling emergency meetings. 3 major clients have pulled their contracts. And Cressida." Naomi paused dramatically. "Cressida just posted on Instagram that she's re-evaluating her life choices and needs time to heal." Selah felt a pang of something that might have been guilt. She had wanted justice, not destruction. She had wanted vindication, not the complete annihilation of everyone involved. "There's more," Naomi continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Gareth Holloway just called me. He wants to talk to you." "About what?" "About what happens next. About damage control. About—" Naomi hesitated. "About whether you're planning to pursue legal action for emotional distress, defamation, intentional infliction of emotional suffering. Selah, you could own half of Manhattan by the time this is over." The suggestion hung in the air like a poisonous flower. Legal action. Lawsuits. Years of court battles and depositions and media attention. The chance to make Corbett pay in the most literal sense for the pain he had caused her. But as she watched Cashin help his younger siblings up the front steps, as she heard Leander's laughter echoing off the brownstone walls, as she saw Isolde stop to wave at Mrs. Rodriguez next door who was watering her flowers, as she witnessed the life she had built from the ashes of her marriage, Selah realized something profound. She didn't want Corbett's money. She didn't want his destruction to define her victory. She had what she had always truly wanted, a family built on love, a life of purpose, and the unshakable knowledge of her own worth. "Tell Gareth I appreciate his concern," she said finally, "but I'm not interested in revenge. I'm interested in moving forward. Selah, you could be set for life. The kids could go to any college you could." "The kids are going to go to any college they choose," Selah interrupted gently. "Because I'm going to make sure of it myself. I don't need Corbett's guilt money to build the life I want." As she hung up and walked toward her front door, Selah's phone buzzed one more time. This message was different from the others, longer, more desperate, sent from a number she knew by heart even though she had deleted it from her contacts years ago. "Selah, please. We need to talk. There's so much you don't understand. So much I need to explain. I know I hurt you, but what happened today? It's not what you think. Can we meet? Can we try to fix this? I never stopped loving you." The message was from Corbett, and reading it felt like being slapped across the face with a wet fish. After everything, after the public humiliation, the revelation of his lies, the complete destruction of his credibility, he was still trying to manipulate her. Still trying to make himself the victim. But what struck her most wasn't his audacity. It was how little the message affected her. 3 years ago, those words would have sent her into an emotional spiral. The suggestion that he loved her, that there were explanations for his cruelty, that maybe she had misunderstood, it would have been enough to make her question everything. Now, standing on the threshold of the home she had built with her own hands and heart, surrounded by the laughter of children who had chosen her as much as she had chosen them, Selah felt nothing but pity for the man who still didn't understand that love wasn't something you could turn on and off like a faucet. She deleted the message without responding and walked through her front door, leaving Corbett Drummond exactly where he belonged, in her past, where he could no longer hurt her. But across town, in the marble fortress that had once been their shared prison, Corbett was just beginning to understand the magnitude of what he had lost. And understanding, he was discovering, was the most painful education of all. 3 days after the baby shower heard round the Hamptons, Selah was in her kitchen making breakfast when the doorbell rang. Through the frosted glass, she could see a figure she didn't recognize, tall, elegant, with silver hair that caught the morning light like spun platinum. The children were upstairs getting ready for school, their voices a comforting backdrop of sibling banter and minor arguments about whose turn it was to use the bathroom. Normal sounds. Safe sounds. The sounds of a life rebuilt from the ground up. When Selah opened the door, she found herself face to face with Vivian Drummond, Corbett's mother, looking every inch the society matriarch despite the early hour and the obvious toll the weekend's events had taken on her refined features. "Mrs. Moreau," Vivian said, her voice carrying the same authority that had once made Selah feel small and inadequate during their marriage. "May I come in? There's something you need to know." For a moment, Selah considered closing the door. She had said everything she needed to say at the baby shower. Her chapter with the Drummond family was closed, the book sealed, the story over. But something in Vivian's eyes, a desperation that seemed foreign on features accustomed to control, made her step aside. "5 minutes," Selah said, leading the older woman to her living room. "The children will be down soon, and I don't want them upset." Vivian's gaze swept the room, taking in the family photos covering every surface, the children's artwork displayed like masterpieces, the comfortable furniture that prioritized warmth over prestige. It was everything the Drummond mansion was not, lived in, loved in, real. "They're beautiful children," Vivian said softly, her eyes lingering on a photo of the triplets at the beach, their faces glowing with pure joy. "They look happy." "They are happy," Selah replied, not bothering to hide the protective edge in her voice. "Because they're loved unconditionally. No strings attached." Vivian winced at the barb, but she didn't defend herself or her son. Instead, she reached into her purse and pulled out a manila envelope, not unlike the one Selah had brought to the baby shower, but thicker, older, with the weight of secrets that had been buried for decades. "What I'm about to tell you," Vivian said, her voice barely above a whisper, "will change everything you think you know about your marriage. About Corbett. About why he became the man he is." Selah's heart began to race despite herself. She had thought she was done with revelations, done with the Dreamin' family drama, done with having her world turned upside down by their secrets. "I don't want to know," she said, even as her eyes fixed on the envelope. "Whatever it is, it doesn't change what he did to me. It doesn't excuse." "He's not infertile," Vivian said, the words dropping into the room like stones into still water. The statement hung in the air between them, impossible and world-shattering. Selah felt the ground shift beneath her feet as everything she thought she knew, everything she had built her revenge on, crumbled like sand. "That's impossible," she whispered. "The medical reports. I saw them myself." "You saw forgeries," Vivian said, her voice heavy with shame. "Very expensive, very convincing forgeries that Corbett commissioned to hide the truth." Selah's legs gave out, and she sank onto her sofa as the implications crashed over her like a tsunami. But why? Why would he? If he wasn't infertile, then why couldn't we? Vivian opened the envelope with trembling fingers and withdrew a thick stack of medical documents, laboratory reports, and what looked like correspondence between doctors. "Because you were never the problem, dear. And neither was he. The problem was that he was sabotaging your attempts to conceive." The words hit Selah like a physical blow. "What do you mean, sabotaging?" "The fertility treatments you underwent," Vivian continued, her voice growing stronger as she forced herself to reveal the truth that had been eating at her for years. "Corbett was switching your prenatal vitamins with birth control pills. He was replacing your hormone injections with saline. Every single month, while you were blaming your body for failing, he was ensuring that failure himself." The room spun around Selah as the full magnitude of the betrayal sank in. Not only had Corbett blamed her for their infertility, not only had he let her undergo painful, expensive treatments, but he had been actively preventing their conception while watching her suffer. Why? The word came out as barely a breath. Why would he do that? Vivian's composure finally cracked, tears streaming down her cheeks as she looked at the woman her son had tortured for 5 years. "Because he never wanted children with you. He married you because you were brilliant, because you made him look good, because you were the perfect trophy wife. But children would have complicated his image, his lifestyle, his other relationships." The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place with devastating clarity. Cressida wasn't the first affair. "No," Vivian whispered. "She was just the one who got pregnant despite his precautions." Selah felt something break inside her chest, not her heart, which had healed years ago, but her understanding of reality itself. The man she had loved, the man she had trusted with her deepest dreams, had spent 5 years systematically destroying those dreams while making her believe it was her own body betraying her. "How long have you known?" Selah asked, her voice deadly quiet. "I found the evidence 2 years ago," Vivian admitted. "I've been trying to find the courage to tell you ever since." 2 years. Selah's laugh was bitter as winter wind. "You've known for 2 years that your son psychologically tortured me, and you're just telling me now?" "I was a coward," Vivian said simply. "I was protecting my son, even though I knew what he had done was unforgivable. But after Saturday, after watching you walk into that ballroom with those beautiful children and seeing the woman you've become despite everything he put you through, I couldn't live with the secret anymore." Selah stood and walked to the window, looking out at the street where her neighbors were going about their normal lives, unaware that the foundation of her entire understanding of her past had just been dynamited. In the distance, she could hear her children's voices upstairs, getting ready for school, completely innocent of the bomb that had just exploded in their mother's world. "There's more," Vivian said quietly. Selah closed her eyes, not sure she could handle any more revelations. "What?" "The medical records you brought to the baby shower, the ones showing Corbett's infertility, they're real." Selah spun around, confusion evident on her face. "But you just said." "He had a vasectomy," Vivian said, the words falling like stones. 3 months after he started sabotaging your fertility treatments." He told the doctor it was because he never wanted children, but I think it was his insurance policy. His way of making sure that even if you discovered what he was doing, even if you tried to conceive naturally, it would never happen. The cruelty of it took Selah's breath away. Not only had Corbett prevented her from getting pregnant through deception and sabotage, but he had made sure she never could get pregnant with him, even as he continued to let her believe the problem was with her body. So the baby Cressida is carrying is definitely Gareth's, Vivian confirmed. Corbett can't father children, and he's known it for years. But he was so desperate to maintain the fiction that you were the problem that he was willing to raise another man's child rather than admit the truth. Selah sank back onto the sofa, her mind reeling with the implications. Every tear she had cried, every hormone injection she had endured, every moment of self-doubt and self-hatred, all of it had been orchestrated by the man who had promised to love and cherish her. "Why are you telling me this now?" she asked finally. Vivian looked out at the family photos again, her eyes lingering on images of joy and love that her own son had never allowed in his life. "Because you deserve to know the truth. Because those children upstairs deserve to know that their mother is the strongest woman I've ever met. And because—" She paused, her voice breaking again. "Because I failed you when you were my daughter-in-law, and I couldn't fail you again." The sound of footsteps on the stairs broke through the heavy moment. Cashin's voice called down from the landing, "Mama, we're ready for school." Selah looked at Vivian, then at the evidence of her ex-husband's systematic cruelty spread across her coffee table. In a few minutes, she would have to walk her children to school with a smile on her face, pretending that her world hadn't just been turned inside out. Again. But as she heard Isolde's laughter and Leander's excited chatter about the spelling test he was sure he would ace, Selah realized something profound. The truth, as devastating as it was, didn't change who she was now. It didn't diminish the family she had built or the love she had found. If anything, it made her victory at the baby shower even more complete. Corbett hadn't just lost his reputation and his relationships. He had lost his carefully constructed narrative about their marriage. And now, finally, the whole truth was out. "Thank you," she said to Vivian, meaning it despite everything. "For telling me. For finally choosing courage over comfort." As Vivian left and Selah prepared to face another day in the life she had built from the ashes of her marriage, she felt something she hadn't expected: peace. Not because the truth was easier to bear than the lies, but because truth, no matter how painful, was always better than living in someone else's fiction. The children came thundering down the stairs, backpacks flying, lunchboxes in hand, ready to conquer another day. And as Selah helped them gather their things and walked them toward the door, she realized that Corbett's cruelty had failed in its ultimate purpose. He had tried to break her. Instead, he had forged her into something unbreakable. How do you think discovering the complete truth about someone's betrayal changes the way you heal from it? Does knowing make it better or worse? The first sign that Corbett wasn't done destroying lives came at 3:47 a.m. on Thursday morning, when Selah's phone exploded with notifications. Bleary-eyed and confused, she grabbed the device from her nightstand, expecting emergency calls or perhaps more media requests about the baby shower incident. Instead, she found her social media accounts flooded with comments, messages, and tags from a story that made her blood run cold. Desperate ex-wife fabricates evidence to destroy successful businessman. Sources close to Dreamland Industries reveal Selah Moreau's medical evidence was falsified. "She never got over the divorce," says anonymous friend. This was elaborate revenge fantasy. The article was published on 3 major gossip sites simultaneously, complete with leaked photos of Selah looking disheveled during her lowest moments 3 years ago, quotes from unnamed sources painting her as unstable and vindictive, and a narrative that positioned Corbett as the victim of an elaborate con job by a scorned ex-wife. But it was the final paragraph that made Selah's hands shake with rage. Sources also questioned the legitimacy of Moreau's adoption of 3 children, suggesting that a woman unstable enough to fabricate medical evidence may not be fit for motherhood. Child Protective Services has been contacted regarding the welfare of the minors. The phone slipped from Selah's nerveless fingers as the implications hit her like a physical blow. Corbett wasn't just trying to destroy her reputation. He was coming for her children. By 6 a.m., her phone was ringing non-stop. Naomi arrived at her door with coffee and grim determination, followed shortly by a parade of reporters, photographers, and curious neighbors drawn by the growing circus on her normally quiet street. "Mama," Cashin said, peering out the window at the chaos below. "Why are all those people here?" Selah's heart shattered as she looked at her son's confused face. At 8 years old, he was too young to understand the adult world's capacity for cruelty, but old enough to sense that their safe haven was under attack. "Some people are telling lies about us," she said carefully, kneeling to his level. "But we know the truth, don't we?" "That we love each other," Isolde chimed in, appearing at her brother's side with her characteristic confidence intact despite the chaos. "That we're a family," Leander added, bouncing on his toes with nervous energy. "That's right," Selah said, pulling all 3 children into her arms and trying to project strength she didn't feel. "And families protect each other." But even as she spoke the words, her phone was buzzing with a new horror. Child Protective Services wanted to schedule an emergency home visit to assess the children's welfare. The appointment was set for that afternoon, giving her mere hours to prepare for what could be the fight of her life. "This is character assassination," Naomi said, pacing the living room like a caged tiger as the children ate breakfast upstairs. "He's using his money and connections to paint you as mentally unstable. The timing isn't coincidental. He's trying to get ahead of whatever legal action you might take by discrediting you first." Selah stared at the newspaper spread across her coffee table, each headline more damaging than the last. In 24 hours, she had gone from triumphant victor to public villain, from loving mother to suspected child abuser, from survivor to suspect. "There's something else," Naomi said quietly, her voice heavy with reluctance. "Gareth called this morning. Corbett's threatening to sue him for corporate espionage, claiming their business partnership gave him access to confidential medical information that he passed to you. If Gareth doesn't recant his statement about the baby's paternity, Corbett will destroy his career and have him arrested." The systematic nature of Corbett's counterattack was breathtaking in its scope. He wasn't just defending himself, he was obliterating everyone who had dared to expose his lies. Gareth would lose his livelihood. Selah would lose her reputation. And if his plan worked, she might lose her children. "He's cornered," Selah said, the words coming out steadier than she felt. "Desperate animals are the most dangerous." The doorbell rang, and through the frosted glass, Selah could see more figures gathering. But these weren't reporters or neighbors. These were official-looking people with clipboards and serious expressions. Child Protective Services had arrived early. The next 2 hours were the longest of Selah's life. She watched strangers examine every corner of her home, interview her children separately, document their bedrooms, their toys, their art projects. The social worker, a tired-looking woman named Janet Morrison, asked probing questions about Selah's mental state, her financial situation, her support system. "The children seem happy and well-adjusted," Janet acknowledged as the interview concluded. "But we have to take allegations of parental instability seriously, especially when they involve questions about how the adoption was obtained." "What does that mean?" Selah asked, though she dreaded the answer. "It means we'll need to review your adoption records, verify that all procedures were followed correctly, ensure that your mental state at the time was conducive to responsible parenting." Janet's voice was professionally neutral, but her eyes held sympathy. "In the meantime, we'll need to schedule follow-up visits. Weekly, for the foreseeable future." After they left, Selah sat in her living room surrounded by the detritus of the invasion, papers scattered everywhere, furniture moved from its usual places, the lingering sense that her sanctuary had been violated. The children, sensing their mother's distress, had gathered around her on the couch like a protective barrier against the world. "Mama," Isolde said softly, "are they going to take us away?" The question hung in the air like poison gas. Selah looked into her daughter's eyes, so trusting, so full of love, and felt something break inside her chest. These children had already survived abandonment, loss, the trauma of the foster system. They had found safety with her, built trust with her, learned to believe in forever families. And now Corbett was trying to destroy that, too. "No, baby," she said, pulling Isolde closer. "No one is going to take you away from me. I promise." But even as she spoke the words, Selah wasn't sure she could keep that promise. Corbett had money, connections, influence. He had shown himself capable of systematic cruelty that spanned years. If he wanted to destroy her family, he had the resources to do it. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "You have 48 hours to publicly retract your statements and issue a formal apology, or this gets much worse. The choice is yours." Selah stared at the message, understanding the ultimatum perfectly. Corbett was offering her a way out: humiliate herself, admit to lies she had never told, destroy her own credibility, and maybe he would call off the attack on her children. But accepting his terms would mean abandoning the truth. It would mean teaching her children that bullies win when good people stay silent. It would mean becoming complicit in her own destruction. As she looked at Cashin's determined face, Leander's hopeful smile, and Isolde's unwavering trust, Selah realized that some fights were worth having, even when you weren't sure you could win them. Especially when the people you loved most were counting on you to try. She deleted Corbett's message without responding and pulled her children closer, preparing for the battle of her life. Selah didn't sleep that night. Instead, she sat at her kitchen table surrounded by 3 years' worth of documentation: medical records, therapy notes, legal papers, photographs, screenshots, voice messages. Every piece of evidence she had gathered during her healing journey, every fragment of truth she had carefully preserved. But now she wasn't looking at them as a victim trying to make sense of her trauma. She was studying them as a strategist preparing for war. By dawn, she had a plan. "Naomi," she said when her friend arrived with coffee and bagels at 6 a.m., "I need you to call everyone. Maya, Dr. Chun, the women's shelter director, anyone who witnessed what Corbett did to me during the marriage. I need character witnesses, and I need them fast." "Selah, are you sure about this? Fighting back might make things worse for the kids." "No." The word came out sharp as glass. "Running away, staying quiet, letting bullies control the narrative, that's what makes things worse. My children are watching how I handle this. I won't teach them that truth doesn't matter when it gets hard." Naomi studied her friend's face, seeing something new there, not the desperate determination of someone backed into a corner, but the calm resolve of someone who had finally stopped running. "What do you need me to do?" "Help me tell the real story." By 8 a.m., Selah was on the phone with Rebecca Martinez, an investigative journalist she had researched the night before, someone with a reputation for taking down powerful men who abused their positions. "Ms. Moreau," Rebecca's voice was crisp and professional, "I've seen the stories about you. Why should I believe you're telling the truth when half the internet thinks you're a scorned ex-wife with an agenda?" "Because I have proof," Selah said simply. "Not just of what he did to me, but of what he's still doing. And because I'm not the only victim." That got Rebecca's attention. "What do you mean?" "Corbett has a pattern. I spent the last 24 hours digging into his history, cross-referencing the business contacts Meyer identified. There are at least 3 other women, employees, business partners, even a client's wife, who have similar stories. He's been doing this for years." The silence on the other end stretched for several heartbeats. When Rebecca spoke again, her voice had shifted from skeptical to intrigued. "Can you prove it?" "Give me 72 hours." While Selah worked the phones, tracking down witnesses and building her case, an unexpected ally emerged from the chaos. Dr. Amanda Chun called just after noon, her voice tight with professional outrage. "Selah, I've been contacted by several medical journals about my unethical breach of patient confidentiality. Corbett is trying to destroy my career for backing up your story." "Dr. Chun, I'm so sorry." "Don't be sorry. Be ready to fight. Because I just spent the morning pulling records, and I found something Corbett doesn't know I have. What? Security camera footage from the hospital parking garage the night you miscarried. Footage of him screaming at you while you were bleeding, telling you it was probably for the best, because you were too weak to be a real mother anyway. Selah's breath caught. She had blocked out most of that night, the trauma too raw even 3 years later. But Dr. Chun had preserved evidence of Corbett's cruelty at her most vulnerable moment. There's more, Dr. Chun continued. I reached out to colleagues at other hospitals where Corbett has business interests. There's a pattern of complaints from female staff about his behavior, nothing formally reported because of his influence, but documented incidents going back 7 years. By Thursday evening, Selah had assembled a coalition of truth-tellers that surprised even her. Dr. Chun with her medical evidence and professional testimony. Maya with her business records and insider knowledge. Gareth, who had decided to risk everything rather than let Corbett silence him. 3 other women who had come forward after hearing Selah's story, each with their own accounts of Corbett's predatory behavior. And Rebecca Martinez, whose preliminary investigation had uncovered financial irregularities in Corbett's companies that suggested his pattern of abuse extended beyond the personal into the professional realm. He's been using company resources to investigate and harass his victims, Rebecca explained during their strategy meeting at Naomi's house. Hiring private investigators, paying for background checks, even funding legal harassment. It's all documented in expense reports his accountant leaked to me. Why would his accountant do that? Selah asked. Rebecca smiled grimly. Because Sarah Kim is one of the women he harassed. Apparently, he made her life hell for 6 months before she found another job. She's been waiting for someone to give her a platform to speak. The meeting was interrupted by Selah's phone ringing. The caller ID showed Janet Morrison from Child Protective Services. Ms. Moreau, Janet's voice was carefully neutral. I wanted to inform you that we've completed our preliminary review of your case. Selah's heart stopped. Around the table, everyone fell silent. And the allegations against you appear to be unfounded. Your adoption records are impeccable. Your children are clearly well cared for and deeply bonded to you, and frankly, the timing of these complaints raises red flags about their motivation. Does that mean? It means we're closing the investigation. However, I want you to know that the person who filed the complaint has been very persistent, calling multiple times a day demanding updates. If you're dealing with harassment from an ex-spouse, there are legal remedies available. After Janet hung up, the room erupted in relieved celebration. But Selah felt oddly calm, as if this victory was just confirmation of something she had already known. Her children were safe. Now it was time to make sure no one else would suffer what she had suffered. Rebecca, she said, when do we publish? The story goes live tomorrow morning. Front page of the website, print edition Sunday. I've got 5 women on the record, medical evidence, financial documentation, and security footage. It's bulletproof. That night, as Selah tucked her children into bed, Isolde asked the question that had been weighing on all their minds. Mama, is the bad man going to stop trying to hurt us now? Selah sat on the edge of her daughter's bed, choosing her words carefully. Baby, there are people in this world who try to hurt others because they think they can get away with it. But when good people stand together and tell the truth, the bad people don't win anymore. Are you a good people, Mama? I'm trying to be, sweetheart. Every single day, I'm trying to be. Then you'll win, Isolde said with 8-year-old certainty. Because the good people always win in the end. As Selah kissed her daughter goodnight, she hoped with every fiber of her being that Isolde was right. At 6 a.m. the next morning, Rebecca's story went live. Power, predation, and cover-up, inside the systematic abuse of women by tech executive Corbett Dreamond. Exclusive investigation reveals pattern of harassment, financial misconduct, and retaliation spanning 7 years. By 8 a.m., Corbett's office was surrounded by reporters. By noon, 3 of his major clients had suspended their contracts pending investigation. By evening, the board of Dreamland Industries had called an emergency meeting to discuss his future with the company. And in her quiet house, surrounded by her children and friends, Selah Moreau watched the man who had tried to destroy her finally face the consequences of his own actions. The reckoning had begun. The first domino fell at 9:23 a.m. on Friday morning, when Dreamland Industries' largest client, a Fortune 500 company worth billions, issued a public statement terminating their contract due to concerns about executive leadership and company culture. Selah was making breakfast for the kids when Naomi called with the news, her voice breathless with excitement. "It's happening, Selah. It's really happening. The stock price is in free fall, 3 more clients have pulled out, and there are rumors the board is meeting in emergency session." Through her kitchen window, Selah could see reporters still camped across the street, their numbers swelling as the story gained momentum. But the circus felt different now, less like a siege and more like validation. These weren't vultures picking at her reputation. They were witnesses to justice finally being served. "Mama," Cashin said, appearing at her elbow with his backpack, "do I still have to go to school today?" Selah looked at her son's worried face and made a decision. "Not today, sweetheart. Today we're going to stay home and be together." She called the school to report all 3 children as excused for family reasons, then settled them in the living room with movies and activities while she monitored the unfolding destruction of Corbett's empire from her laptop. By noon, the story had exploded across social media. #JusticeForSelah was trending, along with #DreamOrnedAbuse and #BelieveWomen. Hundreds of people were sharing their own stories of workplace harassment, domestic abuse, and systematic silencing. Selah found herself at the center of a movement she had never intended to start. But it was the personal messages that hit her hardest. Women writing to thank her for speaking up. Survivors sharing their own stories of escape and recovery. Mothers telling her she was an inspiration to their daughters. "You showed my teenager that fighting back is possible," wrote one woman. "That victims don't have to stay victims forever." "My daughter asked me why you were so brave," said another. "I told her it's because you had something more important than yourself to protect." At 2:47 p.m., Rebecca Martinez called with an update that made Selah's hands shake. "He's done," Rebecca said without preamble. "The board voted him out an hour ago. Effective immediately. Security escorted him from the building." "And the criminal investigation?" District Attorney's Office just announced they're opening a formal inquiry into the financial misconduct. Harassment charges are likely to follow once more victims come forward, and they are coming forward, Selah. "My phone hasn't stopped ringing." As the afternoon wore on, the scope of Corbett's fall became clear. It wasn't just his job, it was everything. His reputation, his social standing, his carefully constructed image as a successful businessman and upstanding citizen. 7 years of systemic abuse had been exposed in 72 hours, and the weight of all those silenced voices was finally crushing him. At 4 p.m., Selah's doorbell rang. Through the peephole, she saw a man in an expensive suit looking haggard and desperate. For a moment, she didn't recognize him. This broken figure bore little resemblance to the polished predator who had terrorized her for years. It was Corbett. "Don't open it," Naomi said sharply, appearing beside her. "Call the police." But Selah found herself oddly calm as she stared at the man who had once held the power to destroy her life with a word. Now he looked small, diminished, like a monster whose mask had finally slipped completely away. She opened the door but kept the chain lock engaged. "Selah." His voice was hoarse, desperate. "Please. We need to talk." "No, we don't. You've destroyed everything. My company, my reputation, my future." "I told the truth," she said simply. "If that destroyed your life, maybe you should examine what kind of life you were living." The truth. Corbett's facade cracked, revealing the rage beneath. "You're nothing but a bitter ex-wife who couldn't handle being replaced. You manipulated everyone, played the victim card, turned people against me with your sob story. Is that what you think happened? Sayla interrupted, and something in her voice made him stop. You think I orchestrated all of this? That I somehow convinced 5 different women to lie about you? That I fabricated medical records and security footage and financial documents? She stepped closer to the gap in the door, looking directly into his eyes. Corbett, I didn't destroy you. You destroyed yourself. Every choice you made, every woman you hurt, every person you silenced, that was you. I just finally stopped being quiet about it. I could have given you everything, he said, his voice breaking. Money, status, security. All you had to do was keep your mouth shut about things that didn't matter anymore. Things that didn't matter? Sayla felt a familiar fire building in her chest, but it was different now, not the desperate flame of a cornered victim, but the steady burn of someone who had finally found her voice. You made me lose a baby. You isolated me from my friends and family. You convinced me I was worthless, crazy, unlovable. And then when I finally escaped and built a new life, you tried to destroy that too. She paused, looking at this man who had once seemed so powerful, so untouchable. But the thing you never understood, Corbett, is that those things, my children, my friends, my peace of mind, they're not things you can give or take away. They're things I built myself, after I got away from you. And that's why you could never really destroy me. Behind her, she could hear her children playing, their laughter floating through the house like music. This house that she had chosen, filled with people she had chosen, representing a life she had built with her own hands from the ashes of what he had tried to burn down. The police are on their way, she said calmly. You're violating the restraining order by being here. I suggest you leave. Corbett stared at her for a long moment, and in his eyes she saw something she had never seen before, the recognition that he had genuinely lost. Not just the battle, but the war. Not just his empire, but his power over her. This isn't over, he said, but the words sounded hollow even to him. Yes, it is, Sayla replied. It's been over for 3 years. You just didn't know it yet. She closed the door and turned the deadbolt, listening to his footsteps retreating down her front path. Through the window, she watched him walk past the reporters, past the cameras, past the remnants of the circus that had briefly surrounded her house. He looked like what he was, a man walking toward a future that would hold consequences instead of enablement, accountability instead of impunity. Her phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. Criminal charges filed. Multiple counts of harassment, financial misconduct, and violation of restraining orders. His bail hearing is Monday. Sayla set the phone aside and walked to the living room, where her 3 children were building an elaborate fort out of couch cushions and blankets. Mama, come help us. Leander called out, his face bright with joy. As she crawled into their makeshift castle, surrounded by the laughter and chaos and unconditional love of her chosen family, Sayla realized that this was what victory actually looked like. Not the destruction of an enemy, but the preservation of everything worth protecting. Outside, the reporters were already packing up their equipment, moving on to the next story. The circus was leaving town. But inside her house, her sanctuary, her castle, her hard-won kingdom of peace, Sayla Moreau and her children were building something that no one could ever take away. A life worth living. 1 year later. The courthouse steps felt different under Sayla's feet as she descended them for the final time. Not the frantic, desperate scramble of a woman fleeing her past, but the measured walk of someone who had seen justice served and could finally close a chapter that had been written in someone else's blood. Corbett Dreamond had been sentenced to 18 months in federal prison for financial fraud, with additional civil penalties that would keep him tied up in legal battles for years to come. The harassment charges had resulted in a permanent restraining order and mandatory counseling. His company had been dissolved, his assets frozen, his reputation obliterated. But more importantly, the 5 other women who had found their voices in the wake of Sayla's story had seen their own justice served. Sarah Kim had been awarded a substantial settlement. Maya had parlayed her whistleblowing into a consulting firm that helped other companies identify and eliminate toxic leadership. Dr. Chun had been honored by the Medical Association for her ethical courage. How does it feel? Rebecca Martinez asked, falling into step beside Sayla as they walked toward the parking garage. The journalist had won 3 awards for her investigative series and was working on a book about institutional abuse and the power of collective action. Like I can finally breathe, Sayla said honestly. Not because he's in prison, though that helps, but because it's finished. The story has an ending now. What's next? Sayla smiled, thinking of the conversation she'd had with her children that morning over pancakes. Cashin starting middle school in the fall, already taller than her shoulder and developing his father's gentle confidence. Isolde launching herself into 5th grade with characteristic determination and a plan to start a school newspaper. Leander, still her baby at 6, but showing signs of the artist he would become, his drawings covering every available surface in their house. We're thinking about getting a dog, she said. A big one. Leander wants a Great Dane, Isolde is campaigning for a German Shepherd, and Cashin thinks we should rescue a mutt from the shelter. What do you want? I want whatever makes them happy. We've had enough fear in our lives. It's time for joy. Back at home, Sayla found chaos in the best possible way. Naomi was in the kitchen making her famous lasagna while simultaneously mediating an argument between Isolde and Leander about whether superheroes could be real. Cashin was sprawled on the living room floor, homework spread around him, occasionally contributing devastating logical points to his siblings' debate. Verdict? Naomi asked, looking up from her cooking. Guilty on all counts. 18 months federal, permanent restraining order, financial penalties that will keep him busy for the next decade. And how do you feel about that? Sayla considered the question as she hung up her jacket and settled into the comfortable chaos of her life. A year ago, she would have felt triumphant, vindicated, perhaps even a little vindictive. But now? Relieved, she said finally. And grateful. Grateful. That it's over. That the kids can grow up without looking over their shoulders. That other women won't have to go through what I went through. She paused, watching Leander attempt to convince his sister that his drawings proved superheroes were scientifically possible. And grateful that I survived long enough to see this. That evening, after dinner and homework and the usual bedtime negotiations, Sayla found herself in her favorite spot, the reading chair by the window in her bedroom, where she had spent so many nights 3 years ago, slowly piecing herself back together page by page. She was no longer reading self-help books or trauma memoirs. Tonight, it was a novel Isolde had recommended, something about a girl who discovered she could talk to trees. Pure escapism. The luxury of a mind that no longer needed to constantly process and heal and rebuild. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Ms. Moreau, my name is Jennifer Walsh. I saw your story in the news and I think my ex-husband might be doing something similar. Could we talk? Sayla stared at the message for a long moment. Over the past year, she had received dozens of similar requests. Women who saw their own stories reflected in hers, who needed guidance navigating the complex process of speaking truth to power. She had helped when she could, connecting them with resources, sharing contact information for good lawyers and therapists, sometimes just listening when they needed someone who understood. It wasn't a burden, it was a purpose she had never expected to find. She typed back, of course. Call me tomorrow at whatever time works for you. You're not alone. A soft knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. Mama. Isolde's voice, small and uncertain in the darkness. Come in, baby. Her daughter padded across the room in her favorite pajamas, the ones with the astronauts that she'd chosen because space is where brave people go. I had the dream again, Isolde said, climbing into the chair beside her mother. Selah's heart tightened. Even though it had been months since the media circus, sometimes the stress still manifested in her children's sleep. Usually it was Leander who had nightmares, but occasionally one of the older two would be visited by fears they couldn't quite articulate. The one where people try to take us away from each other? Isolde nodded, curling against her mother's side. Tell me the real story, Selah said, the words that had become their ritual for chasing away dream monsters. Tell me what really happened. We were scared, Isolde said, her voice getting stronger. But we stayed together. And you fought for us, and your friends helped, and the truth came out, and now we're safe. That's right. And what do we know about our family? That it's not about blood or papers or what other people think. Isolde recited the words they had practiced together. It's about love and choice and showing up for each other every day. And are we going to keep showing up for each other? Every single day, Isolde said firmly. Until we're old and gray and probably still arguing about whether superheroes are real. Selah laughed, holding her daughter close. Probably. But that's okay. The best families are the ones where everyone gets to be themselves, even when they disagree. After Isolde had returned to her own bed, armed with renewed confidence and the promise that monsters, real or imagined, had no power in their house, Selah remained in her chair by the window. The street outside was quiet, peaceful, lined with houses full of families sleeping safely in their beds. No reporters, no cameras, no sense of siege or threat. Just a normal suburban evening in a normal suburban neighborhood where a woman and her 3 children lived their beautifully ordinary lives. She thought about the woman who would call her tomorrow, scared and looking for guidance. She thought about the other women still trapped in situations like the one she had escaped. She thought about her children, growing up with the knowledge that their mother had fought for truth and won. But mostly, she thought about tomorrow, Saturday morning with nowhere they had to be, pancakes and cartoons, and the endless negotiations about whether today was finally the day to go look at dogs at the shelter. Selah Moreau closed her book, turned off the lamp, and went to bed in her own house, surrounded by her own family, living her own life. 3 years ago, she had been a woman fleeing from the wreckage of her marriage with nothing but hope and determination. Now she was a woman who had rebuilt herself from the ground up, who had turned her scars into strength and her survival into service. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to choose courage over comfort, new chances to show her children what it looked like to live authentically in a complicated world. But tonight, she was simply a mother whose children were safe, whose story had found its proper ending, whose life had become something worth living. And that was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. In the end, this is not a story about revenge or destruction, but about the quiet revolution that happens when someone refuses to let their worst moment define their entire life. It's about the radical act of healing, the courage required to hope, and the truth that the best victories are not won against our enemies, but for the people we love. Selah Moreau's story reminds us that survival is not the end goal, it's the beginning. What matters is what we build from the ashes, how we transform our pain into purpose, and whether we use our freedom to create something beautiful. Sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do is simply refuse to stay broken. Sometimes that's enough to change everything.